After years of lockdowns and students being out of the classroom, well, sadly, they're out of the classroom again. I'm Adrienne Batra. With me are Jamil, Jivani, and Brian Lilley. So what's swirling around are 55,000 CUPE workers have now hit the picket line. And in solidarity, other unions are showing their support with them, including teachers. Brian, at issue yet again is money. What's going on?
Well, CUPE's done a really good job of playing the PR game to try and make it sound like everyone in CUPE makes just $39,000 a year. I've been through the contracts, Adrienne. It depends on what you do for a living. Janitor, head caretaker with the Toronto District School Board, for example, they make over $34 an hour. That's actually the old contract, so it's probably over 35 now. If you're a finance clerk with the Ottawa Catholic Board, you're making $62,000 a year. These are all in the contracts, and you can find the links in my columns. But they drag down the average by including people who work 6 hours a day, just 194 days a year. They work for the school hours while school is in session. So, but they're paid between $18 and over $30 an hour, depending on their level. But they want an 11.7% annual increase. Nobody I know thinks that makes any sense whatsoever. And if we did that to teachers, we'd take teachers, because they would demand this same thing. They go from earning 93 grand a year to over 140 grand a year in very short order. That's not affordable.
And I think, Jamil, from the government's perspective, representing the taxpayers, it's unaffordable, it's unrealistic, because then if they were to capitulate on that 11% increase, that then translates to every other union, which will then use that as the benchmark to demand their salary increases. But I want to go back to my initial comments about schools being shut down. Ontario was one of the most locked down jurisdictions for the longest time in North America. We've seen the school numbers, we've seen the math scores, we've seen the English scores. The kids are not all right. We're already so far behind. While the rest of the world, including, we have a competitive world now, it's a global, kids are doing better. Canadian kids are falling behind in Canada's largest province. Jamil, I know the province is getting sort of hit over the head with using the notwithstanding clause. From your perspective, who's winning this argument?
Well, I think the majority of parents, the majority of citizens that I talk to are frustrated with school closures. I think that there's a sensitivity, especially given the current state of our economy under Justin Trudeau's policies, to the desire for school workers to be paid more. I think people recognize that that's a legitimate point, maybe not 11%, but some kind of raise, certainly. But I think people don't think that that's worth closing the schools over, given what's been happening over the last few years. And I would say that, yes, we've had a lot of debates over the notwithstanding clause. We've had debates over this sort of back to school or back to work legislation. But I think that we need to have a bigger conversation about reforms. I mean, this system is clearly not working for lots of kids. As you mentioned, Adrienne, the math scores affirm that undeniably, objectively. There is a problem in how we're doing public education in Ontario. And I'd like to see a bigger conversation about what kind of changes to policies we need to see. So maybe some of the energy around this labor dispute might lead to some bigger changes in how we actually deliver public education.
As the saying goes, Brian, there's always opportunity in chaos. And to Jamil's point, I think that there are a lot of parents looking around the table right now and thinking to themselves, every year there seems to be a school disruption. Even if you exclude the pandemic, prior to that, it didn't matter if it was Dalton McGuinty was premier, Kathleen Wynne was premier, there was always a disruption in the school year, or a looming threat of a disruption in the school year. Does this present an opportunity? And would the Ford government even go down this road of looking at the potential for school choice? As we know, the largest school district in the country, the TDSB, is seeing declining enrollment anyway.
Well, they should consider looking at that, but given how tepid they are when it comes to things like using private clinics to clear away surgical backlogs, and the fact that they keep caving to their own bureaucrats on that, I wouldn't expect that they would have, to use the wrestling term, the intestinal fortitude to do this. But now, I'll give you a couple of quick numbers. When you look at the global education budget in Ontario, according to public accounts, I think it was about $32 billion last year we spent. You divide that, and we're talking $16,000 per student. If you said to me, you can go to the the school down the street that's always being shut down by strikes and work to rule, or you can take this $16,000 and go to the school of your choice. Well, you can find quality private schools in Toronto, in Ottawa, in Oakville, in Hamilton, in London for $16,000 a year or less. And it gives parents the choice to say, you know what,
Yeah.
if my local public school is working, great. If it's not, I can go somewhere else where I can get my kid a quality education.
You know, Jamil, we saw in recently in the United States, with parents so much more engaged with seeing what their kids are being taught online. You saw a lot of turnover in a lot of school boards where you would normally see turnover. We didn't quite see that here in Canada. There isn't that frustration, but I feel parents are engaged. Parents are, especially with a growing immigrant population, they want their kids to have the best, and they came here for a reason. If they feel that their kids are being taught critical race theory versus math and reading and arithmetic, they're gonna speak up. It's gonna be those voices that are gonna be heard. We saw no turnover really in the school boards across the province. But that said, in the recent election, but that said, I think that if reform is going to come, it's going to come from those parents and them raising up their voices for their kids versus the Canadian students who have been here, born and raised here. I really find that there's a dichotomy happening with, the brown and black kids who suffer the most under this, frankly, shutdowns and lockdowns and all this stuff. There's an opportunity here for those parents to talk about these reforms and demand these reforms that we're discussing.
Yeah, I think we're living through a very interesting time in Canada where a growing number of people are not just immigrating to the country, but also starting to feel like they belong here, some ownership over the future of the country. And I think as that changes, as more people start to say, it's not just about being welcomed here, it's also about making sure that the systems and the processes in this country, the institutions in this country are doing right by my kids. It will change the way voters think and the way voters respond. We're starting to see that on issues like crime. There's more of a law and order push in Canadian cities. The defund the police movement, for example, has failed miserably because a lot of these families are saying, what the heck are you talking about? We want more police, not less police. And I think that will come to the school system as well. Unfortunately, as you said, Adrienne, it's taking more time than we like. We're seeing that happen in the US first, but I do believe it will happen here because ultimately parents moving to this country want to guarantee their kids a better future, and critical race theory doesn't do that.
Brian, I'm going to give you the last quick word on this. I want to bring this back to where we are right now. We don't know how long this strike is going to last. We know that there are very steep fines per union, per employee that they are going to be penalized with. The Ford government has pushed through their back to work legislation using the notwithstanding clause. I want you to address that aspect of it because, you see the headlines, oh, Doug Ford is tearing up the Constitution. But the notwithstanding clause is part of the Constitution. There's a very good reason and explanation as to why they had to use it.
To put it in summary, for 28 years, the Supreme Court kept ruling, no, there is no constitutional right to strike. That does not exist. It's different than a statutory right to strike, which did exist in common law that said, yep, you can go on strike, but it wasn't a constitutional right. That meant that at a certain point, a legislature could put in back to work legislation. In 2015, the Supreme Court overturned decades of precedent, including precedent that they had agreed to just 4 years earlier, and said, no, suddenly there is a constitutional right to strike. That's why you had to use the notwithstanding clause. This is the first big test of back to work legislation since that court ruling. We'll see how this plays out. But, the courts invented something that wasn't there and upset the balance that judges had been trying to find for decades with one quick decision.
Well, both sides have dug in, and at the end, it's the kids that got caught in the middle and the biggest losers here. Log on to Facebook and Twitter and let us know what you think, and go to thetorontosun.com for more on this story and others that you won't find coverage anywhere else.